Hi, I'm Elyse Morrison. I am a facilitator, coach, and the founder of Inner Workout. 15 years from now, the work that I'm doing today, I like to say that I'm doing two things. So I'm working towards a world without burnout, and I'm also developing leaders who care. So if all goes well towards that, I don't think I can personally get rid of burnout in the world, but I would like to think that I could play a small role in lessening the prevalence of burnout, both in people starting to realize when they're starting to get burned out before reaching burnout all the way, and then also in developing leaders who care, so people can be looking out for the people who report to them and seeing, oh, they look like they're getting towards burnout, and really just like changing the way that we are experiencing ourselves, but also engaging with each other. So that's my goal in the next 15 years. So the best piece of advice that I received that I didn't take, I'm not sure if anyone directly told this to me, but I had heard, whether it was from podcasts or from other things, like when you're transitioning out of a full-time role, to make sure you have more money saved than you think that you need. And I was like, yeah, I'm good. And I had like a number. And now if I could go back and do it, I would save like 2 or 3 times that number. And that's what I would tell my younger self. So I don't know if it was like a person telling me that, but it was definitely something that I heard, and I thought I was the exception, and I definitely was not the exception. So there are 2 codes that really shape the way that I work, and they're interrelated. So there's this one quote, and I'm not exactly sure who said it, that says, be stubborn about your goals and be flexible with your methods. And then there's a woman, her name is Michelle Palazan-Lipsitch. She runs this company, and I consider her kind of a mentor from afar. And one of her mentors told her to fall more in love with the problem than the solution. And the way that I think those intersect is, a lot of times as business owners, we can get so enamored with our solution. We think like we are going to change the world, and we are going to do it by going from A to B to C. And really, this is a long haul game. Like, being an entrepreneur is not something that you just like do for a cute little year or so and then you've accomplished all of your goals. So you have to fall in love with the problem. You have to know where you're going. You have to know the change that you want to make. But the best entrepreneurs, and how I try and be as an entrepreneur, is to be really flexible, not too tied to the how, but really connected to the where we're headed. So the reason that I do the work that I do is because of my experience with burnout. I had this time in my life that, 2017, I would say, was kind of like the breaking point, the boiling point, but it was the way I'd been living my life for a long time, where I am what you might call a self-aware overachiever. I know a lot about myself. I know how I work. I could tell you all these different frameworks and things to be like more mindful or how to be more productive. But I had trouble actually internalizing that. And this gets into a lot about being a Black woman, especially, where, at least in my experience and the experience of other people I've heard, we're so conditioned to give and give and give, often to our detriment. And there's this idea that in general, we have to be the best to get like half as much. And so I had this mindset that I have to do more and more and more. And in 2017, I was working full-time. I was the first full-time employee at a startup. I also had a side hustle doing brand strategy. I was planning a wedding, and then was like in my newlywed phase later on in the year. I was volunteering for multiple nonprofits, and I also was like trying to have some semblance of a social life. And I kept finding that I would get to this place where I was just like overwhelmed. Overwhelmed was just my state of being constantly. And so I would do the things that people said, like, oh, get a massage, or oh, take a weekend off, which maybe slapped a little Band-Aid on it. But because the way I'd structured my life was unsustainable, having the massage wasn't actually getting to the root of the problem. So when I started realizing, okay, the way I'm structuring my life is unsustainable, it's leading me to this place where I am consistently being burned out, and maybe I pull back for a little and then I'm burning out again. The work that I had to do to get to a place where now my life feels full and also sustainable is what led me to do this work. And it's actually what led me to talk about self-care the way that I talk about it, which is listening within and responding in the most loving way possible. What I found that I was doing is that I was totally bypassing my connection to myself. I was turning up the volume on what everyone around me thought that I should be doing. And in the times that I could hear myself, I was often saying, oh, well, I can sleep later, or, oh, I'm overwhelmed, but that's okay, I need to say yes to this thing. I was very rarely responding with love. And now that I have really built a life that I would say is care-filled, it just completely transforms the way that I live day to day, but also the way that I run my business. So yeah, burnout is something that I have experienced. Sometimes I get closer to it again than I would like to, but I'm grateful for my experience with burnout because I would not be here talking about this and I wouldn't be here doing my life's work if it wasn't for my experience with burnout. There are a few ways that I think that you can identify burnout in your own life. So there's like the clinical idea and perspective of burnout, and there are symptoms that you can notice, like you're feeling really fatigued all the time. Maybe you're feeling more emotionally temperamental. You're having this anxiety and overwhelm. Those are all signs of burnout. In my own experience, I find that I am the most prone to burnout when I am the least connected to myself. So if you find yourself constantly saying things like, I should be doing this, or you're noticing that you're not super excited about something, but you feel like you have to, that's a sense that you could be leading yourself on a path towards burnout. And we both know that as entrepreneurs, there are things that you have to do that are not always enjoyable. Like, I'm not sitting here saying like it all needs to be sunshine and roses, but if you notice that the trend in your life is that you're living based on what other people want from you, that's a sign that either you are burned out or you are on a fast track to burnout. And a lot of people are on that track and don't even realize it. I think the more marginalized identities you hold, the more work that you have to do to grapple with perfectionism, because we are socialized in this society where we are told that the norm is something that looks and operates different than us. And so for many of us who are ambitious and who are high achievers, we feel like we need to put ourselves into this mold, and that can be incredibly uncomfortable, incredibly demoralizing, exhausting to feel like you have to pretend to be something else, and can just really mess with your self-esteem to be like, who I am is not enough. I have to be like something else in order to get ahead. And then there is this fear of, I may be the only, or I'm one of the few. So if I have a misstep, if I do something wrong, there may not be opportunities, not just for me, but also for the people who are coming behind me. So the first thing that I always say when I'm having conversations like this is like, that's real. That's not just in your head. Like, there are societal structures that have happened over time that all contribute to the way that the reason why you feel this way. That's real. I want to validate you in that. And also, it's not healthy for us to continue to operate in and from that space. And we're not creating change for the future, for the people who are coming behind us, if we continue to operate from that space. So what I would recommend is figuring out what your level of wiggle room with regards to failure tolerance there is. Like, we, as people who are running companies, I would guess you have a pretty high standard of excellence. I would also offer that everything does not need to be perfect. You've likely heard that quote, done is better than perfect. So where are the places where it needs to be the 100% high standard, and where are the places where you can relax a little bit and say, you know what, done is good enough? And where are the places where you can say, this is gonna be an experiment. I don't know that this is gonna go how I planned, but I'm willing to try, and I'm going into this with the idea that this is a possibility that I could go like this. It's also possible that it could go like that. And I was just talking with one of my friends and one of my clients about this, where we were saying so many times, and this is how I help recondition myself when I am trying something new, I'm saying this is something I'm testing. This is something I'm experimenting with. If it helps to put a time frame on it, and even this is something I do for myself, but even if you have other stakeholders, if it's your board, if it's your investors, if it's your teammates, to say, we're gonna try this, here are the assumptions that we're making, and then we're gonna see what goes on between. But I think a lot of times our culture tells us that we just need to get everything perfect the first time. And then because we live in an age with LinkedIn and Instagram and all these places where we're showing perfection and it looks like everyone else is getting it right the first time, it really skews our perception. So see where are the places where you can give yourself some grace, where you can adopt that mindset of experimentation. And then over time you start to realize like, oh, I can make so much more progress when I'm not forcing myself to try and be perfect all of the time, which is just an impossible standard. You're a human. Nothing that you do is going to be perfect all of the time. I think I would say to founders like me who holds one or many marginalized identities is to remember that you're human, to remember your humanity. And even though it can feel like there is an additional pressure on you, because there is an additional pressure on you, it is not going to be healthy for you to act like you are some kind of machine or robot. And I would encourage you to find those places and those people who can connect with you at a human level. Like for me, I have some friends who could care less about my business and just love Taylor as the human. And I have friends who are business owners who, yes, see me as a human, but also can validate, like, that's real. That thing that happened was a little weird. It was shady, and I'm not being like gaslit in the situation. So find those communities who can see you as a human, who can honor different aspects of your humanity, because it's really necessary. It's necessary for all founders, but it's like doubly necessary for you. I think there are a variety of ways that you can challenge scarcity mindset. I think the first one is to realize where you are starting to think that there is an us versus them situation, or there's like a limited, I can have this slice of pie or they can have that slice of pie. And I don't know if y'all have heard this before, but it's like, actually you could be in a bakery. There could be an infinite number of pies. There are all of these different ingredients. You can work together to share different ingredients. So to notice that it's pretty limiting to just think it's me versus them, I get the pie or they don't, and think about like, how can we create more pie for everyone? And that could be in investor relationships. That could be in looking at people in your industry and saying, okay, where's the overlap where we could collaborate? That could be in making introductions with people. The other thing that I really like to share with other founders who look like me in some way is that you're building a business, you're not building a charity. This is something that I've had to contend with. And if you are not resourced in your business, then you are not going to be able to create jobs for other people. You're not going to be able to sustainably create the impact that you want to have. So you like selling yourself short or giving away too much for too little is not only detrimental to you, but it's detrimental to the impact that you want to have. And I personally, I'm in a space in kind of the wellness, personal development space that tends not to have a ton of people who look like me. And for a long time, I thought that it was my job to have everything be as accessible as possible, which meant as low cost as possible. And what I've realized is that accessibility can look like, sure, you have some free things, maybe you have a podcast or you have a newsletter that shares some aspect of your business, but then you can have things at other price points. Everything doesn't need to be accessible to everyone, and I find like that's a big kind of scarcity mindset and also almost guilt trip that we can have is like, if every single person who looks like me cannot engage with my company, cannot afford my product or service, then I'm doing something wrong. But when you try to make everything accessible in that way, then you are not able to give back. Like now that I've made shifts in my business, it's so cool to be like, oh, I can afford to pay this person their full rate now, or I can donate to a nonprofit that I really care about because I have built a business where I feel resourced, and then I'm able to give back in those ways. The last thing that I will add is one of the best ways, the best antidotes to that mindset of scarcity is to be generous. And generosity, I want to be really clear, doesn't just mean like making it rain. Like you don't have to do that, even though if you want to do that, more power to you. But it can be, I'm going to be generous in introducing someone here, or I'm going to be generous, and even though me and that other founder, we both qualify for this program, I'm not going to gatekeep it. I'm going to tell them about it too. There's more than enough opportunity. The reason that I'm sitting here today actually is because my friend was moderating a panel, and she told the people Taylor would be an amazing person to be on this panel. And then I built an amazing relationship with that company, and this company has now partnered with Black Ambition, and it was all because another Black woman was willing to say, hey, there's more than enough opportunity for both of us, even though we operate in the same place. So find those little ways to be generous, whether it's just like commenting on someone's post or story and reminding them that they're doing a good job, or making an introduction, or having some way to financially support them. But the more generous I am with what I have, the more I'm able to receive, and the more honestly that comes to me. So I did get fired up about that. I am stepping off of my soapbox. I love this question, who am I uninterrupted? And this is something that I've been wrestling with a lot because I recently got diagnosed with ADHD, and I'm about to be 30, and so like it's completely changing the way I've like viewed my whole life. And I used to think for a long time that it was bad that I had a lot of interest or like get really into something, and I think uninterrupted, I'm a person who is like really curious, really creative, really nurturing. I'm also like really silly. And I was talking about this with one of my friends. I forget which friend it was, but we were talking about how when we're super insecure, that's when we like start to act really serious, and we're like, I just need to have like my business persona and I need to be so serious. But like the more when I'm uninterrupted, when I'm secure in myself, I can like make jokes, I can laugh. I like literally laugh until I cry, literally roll on the floor laughing at something. And yeah, I love seeing more of that come up in my life and also in my work. So Inner Workout was really birthed out of my own journey with burnout and around self-care, and it has been quite the journey. So the original idea came to me on a yoga mat, and I had this thought. Honestly, it felt like a voice in my head, not in a weird way, but like, what if there was a class that helped people build the skill of self-care, the way that I talk about it, listening within and responding in the most loving way possible? So originally, Inner Workout was going to be like the Zumba of self-care. I built this practice based on yogic philosophy that blends movement, breathwork, journaling, meditation, and what we call flow. And my plan was to train facilitators in this practice, again, rooted in this yogic concept of the koshas, which we talk about as the 5 dimensions of well-being. And we actually did 3 rounds of facilitator training, but Inner Workout publicly launched in September of 2019. The plan was to do these like big in-person trainings. And if you do the math, then you know that about 6 months later, the pandemic hit. So everything didn't go exactly as planned. And also during the pandemic, that was like the highest, self-care was the highest search term during the early part of the pandemic. So I had this self-care company that, again, if you think about this idea of being like stubborn about your goals and flexible with your methods, the method I thought I was going to do is this self-care class. And it became clear that people needed to practice self-care, and they didn't necessarily want to take a class on their mat. They needed a more holistic way to look at it. So we built the Take Care assessment, which is free. You can take it on our website. It measures your well-being across 5 dimensions, and then it gives you personalized practices based on your results. And now we've built Inner Workout really into, I would almost call it, I call it a wellness lifestyle brand, or a self-care and personal development lifestyle brand, but in some ways it's a media company too. We have a podcast, we have a newsletter called Self-Care Sundays that thousands of people read every Sunday. And we have workshops, an online community, and really different ways to help people actually build self-care as a skill and actually do the inner work. And I keep saying actually because it's so easy to consume content around these things, and it's not super easy to make sure that those things are actually integrated and practiced in your life. So that's the consumer side of Inner Workout. And I also have a book coming out also called Inner Workout. That'll be out March of next year, March of 2023, depending on when you're watching this. That takes the Take Care assessment, and it's almost like a strengths finder, and it helps you use your results and apply them in your daily life. So that's all the stuff that's direct to consumer. And then we've also built this almost on accident, as silly as that sounds to say, but we've built this corporate side of the business where, because my background is studied human and organizational development with a focus in leadership and org effectiveness at Vanderbilt, I've always been really interested in how people work and how people work together. And as more people were drawn to the work of Inner Workout from the consumer side, I started getting companies coming to me and saying, wait, how can we have you come speak to us at our organization? How can you help us develop our leaders? So we have another arm that we call the Institute, and that's really where we're developing leaders who care, and we're helping both employees and leaders build skills of self-care and mindfulness and setting boundaries and all of that good stuff. So I think that the idea of what it looks like to be a leader is changing. What we've been taught is a leader, and the prototypical leader is really kind of steeped in white supremacy and doesn't serve most of us. And I think that especially in the pandemic, we've been challenged to think about what is the leadership that actually motivates people and engages people, whether we're working remotely or we're working together. And I think a good starting point is to think of the leaders who have helped you develop the most. And I would guess that it's not the people who are super cold or standoffish. It was the people who cared about who you were as a person. It was the people who were able to see what you were interested in, both in your role and outside of your role, and connect whatever you were doing to your why and what motivated you. So I think there's always this balance of wanting to be a leader who can see people's full humanity and also not have people feel pressured, like you don't have to share all of your business at work, but you are welcome here. I'm not going to ignore the fact that you're Black. I'm not going to ignore the fact that you're a woman, that you are affected differently as you come into the office. So what keeps coming back to mind for me is a sense of humanity and purpose. And the leaders of the future are going to be able to see their people as whole people who have lives outside of the office. They're going to be able to connect the work to people's purpose and why they think that they're here on this earth. And they're also going to do that mindfully, using the skills of mindfulness to help them respond to the changes that are continuing to happen. I don't think we're ever going to go back to a point where business feels predictable. Business as unusual is like the new norm. I think some powerful ways for founders to protect their mental health is to get support before you think you need it, whether that is in the form of a mastermind group, a coach, a therapist, maybe a foundation of all 3 of those, to make sure that you're staying connected to people who see you and love you outside of the business. As your star continues to rise, there are going to be a lot of people who want to be along with you for the ride when things are up, who may not be there for you when it's hard and you're making the tough decisions. So keep that connection with people who see the whole you and who are like your ride or dies. Like that's what one of my group chats is called. It's like my ride or dies. I know that like my business could go to pieces and they would still be there for me, and they'd be like, cool, Are you like moving in with me? What's happening? Like, I'm here for you. We're figuring this out. You really, really need that level of support. And when you are waiting until you're in crisis, it's too late. Your nervous system is so freaked out that the idea of reaching out for support is often too overwhelming. So when you get the support ahead of time, even though you're like, oh, that's something I can do later, oh, I'll get it when I need it, you are setting yourself up for success in a way that you will not fully be able to appreciate until you have those hard times come. I think we're at a really interesting point when it comes to mindfulness and mental health and people of color. For a long time, it felt like a luxury, and it also felt like a liability to say that we might need support. Because if you think like back to our ancestors who were like literally picking cotton, if you were seen as quote unquote crazy, like you were very disposable. And that is something that was passed down to us, where we're just like, we're fine, like buck up, you don't have to worry about this, just like keep your head down and keep it moving. And that's harmful, and that mindset has been like passed down to us, and I'm starting to see that shift in my generation, but it's so cool to see how it's changing in the generations below me. And I think that for us as entrepreneurs, we can continue to normalize that, because we are in a place where it is very strange. We're building something that can be high growth. We're building something that can rise and fall at a pace that is not normal for most other places. And so again, being willing to have that support, have those conversations, and be honest when something is hard. Be honest about the fact that you have a therapist that you talk to. Be honest about the fact that you got diagnosed with depression or anxiety. The more that we normalize those conversations as not something that is like a luxury, but as something that is a reality, and that there are so many opportunities for us to be supported in that, the more willing other people are going to be to have that conversation. And I think the reason that shifted is because people have been willing to go first and to say, hey, this is something I dealt with. And a lot of times they do that once they get to a point where they feel safer, where they've made it, where they have that security. But I'm seeing that shift where people are saying, oh wait, it's hard in the process too. And the more that we're willing to do that, the more change we're going to see. And honestly, we'll probably make it mentally and emotionally safer for people who look like us to engage in entrepreneurship, when we're willing to say, these are the places that can be hard, and these are the supports that you can seek out when it does get hard. So I think that boundaries are basically outlining how we're going to allow ourselves to be treated, whether that is how I will allow myself to treat myself, how I will allow others to treat me. And so when you can get clear on, in any given situation, what is my expectation here? I will not talk to myself unkindly, even if I make a mistake. I will allow someone to push a meeting back, but they need to communicate it with me in a certain amount of time. So first you get clear on what those boundaries are, and then you have to have the conversation about them, which is the hard part. It's difficult already to uncover our own needs, but then when we get too far ahead and we're like, okay, I decided that I have this boundary, now everyone knows it, or I said it once and everyone remembers it, you have to be willing to have those conversations about, this is the standard I'm setting, this is why I'm setting it, and what needs to happen, so this is something that we both feel comfortable with. And maybe you're setting a boundary and someone's like, actually, as it stands, that's not feasible, but here's how we can meet in the middle for something that feels supportive for both of us. So that's kind of how I think about boundaries, is first a conversation with yourself and then a conversation with other people. Hi, I'm Elyse Morrison. I am a facilitator, coach, and the founder of Inner Workout.